Welcome to today's podcast on the structure of the atom. In this video, we are going to be looking at the different particles that make up the atom. Atoms are made up of particles called neutrons, protons, and electrons. The neutron is a large particle that has no charge, or a neutral neutron. We also have protons, which is another large particle that has a positive charge. And we have electrons that are small particles with a negative charge. Looking at this image of a nucleus, we can see yellow and blue spheres. So the yellow spheres are representative of protons. The blue spheres are neutrons. So again, you can see our nucleus is made up of neutrons and protons, which are again relatively large particles, compared to an even smaller particle called the quark. So quarks are what make up neutrons. An arrangement of 3 quarks makes up a neutron, and a different arrangement of 3 quarks makes up protons. Quarks are the smallest particles that scientists have found. Scientists study quarks in accelerator laboratories, like the Fermi Lab in Illinois. At the Fermi Lab, there is a machine called the Tevatron, which is 6.4 kilometers in circumference. And the Tevatron uses electrical and magnetic fields to accelerate, focus, and make fast-moving particles collide. And when these particles collide and smash into protons, they break apart, and scientists can study even smaller particles, like quarks. We'll now turn our attention away from the nucleus, where our protons and neutrons are located, made up of quarks, and we'll now look at electrons in the electron cloud. These small negative charges, known as electrons, move around the nucleus in an area called the electron cloud. The electron cloud is an area about 100,000 times larger than the diameter of the nucleus, so they have a large area to move around, but there's a higher probability that the electrons are in a certain place compared to other areas where there's less of a chance that we'll find electrons. And so that's what these dots are showing you, that there's a higher probability of where the electron can be found at any given moment compared to a lesser chance. Now we'll look at a specific example. Now we're looking at a helium atom. So we can see that in our nucleus we have our protons, and specifically we have 2 protons, and that's what makes this a helium atom, because it has 2 protons, again, that are made up of smaller particles called quarks, and it also has 2 neutrons, and it also has 2 electrons orbiting around the nucleus in that electron cloud. You will learn in another podcast that an atom could have a different amount of neutrons in its nucleus, and an atom can also have a different amount of electrons due to bonding. But an atom will always have the same number of protons. If it doesn't, it no longer becomes that atom. It becomes a different element. Atoms are defined by how many protons they have. So as I earlier said, an element can have a different number of neutrons, it can have a different number of electrons, but again, the element will be defined by how many protons are in that nucleus. So if I have 1 proton in a nucleus, I have the element hydrogen. Now, if I took away that 1 proton, I'd no longer have an atom of hydrogen. I'd have nothing. If I added 1 proton to that nucleus though, and if I now had, so I started at 1 proton, if I add a proton to it and have 2, I would then have helium, like the example we were looking at earlier. Now if I add another proton and I have 3 protons in the nucleus, I now have the element lithium. Again, if I add a 4th proton to the nucleus, now I have 4 protons in my nucleus, I have the element beryllium. And you guys are getting the point here, I believe, that if I keep adding protons, I get a new element. So 5 protons, I'm now up to boron. If I add my 6th proton to a nucleus, or add another proton and I get a total of 6 in the nucleus, I have the element carbon. So again, Elements are defined by how many protons they have in their nucleus. They might have more neutrons or less, and more or less electrons, but the number of protons is what defines the element. In summary, we talked about how atoms are made up of protons, which have a positive charge, neutrons, which have no charge, and electrons, which have a negative charge. And those protons and neutrons, which are made up of even smaller particles called quarks, are found in the nucleus, and the electrons are found in the electron cloud, and how the atom or the element itself is defined by how many protons it has. Thank you for watching our podcast.